When Akira Toriyama passed away, it left a mass it left a shockwave, right? Like, it was a massive blow to not only the manga and anime industry, it was, like, a huge deal for, like, popular culture because Dragon Ball is fucking massive. It's, like, the biggest thing in, like, millennial childhoods all over the world, okay? This series not only had left a large impact on, like, Japanese children, from the late '80s and '90s, it was, like, all over the world, you know what I mean? Dragon Ball blew up so big, at a certain point at that, like, it the prospect of, like, it ever ending, you know? Akira Toriyama passing away, it's not like, when the author of Berserk passed away, Kentaro Miura. It's not like when he died, where, I mean, it was still, you know, shout out to Miura, a fucking awesome manga artist. I'm not trying to downplay that guy or anything, but it wasn't quite the same situation where it's like, okay, like, this Berserk story, can it even continue without Miura? Can we keep Berserk going without Miura? You know? Um, and of course, the answer ended up being yes, but only because he had a very close colleague that was willing to finish it on his behalf. It ended up continuing, in a certain sense, but there was a lot of back and forth on whether or not Berserk should continue. With Dragon Ball, it's a whole different situation because Dragon Ball, when it comes to manga, is basically like Star Wars at this point, you know what I mean? This is a franchise that, like, has become so big for Toei, for for, like, the Japanese, popular culture economy, that I believe I've read this online. I believe this was in, like, a news article or something, like, Dragon Ball is so big. It's such a big franchise, and there's so many people employed that, like, like, depend on this series. There's so much of, like, the Japanese economy that depends on this franchise that, like, it has to keep going. You know what I mean? So, like, I feel like there is that feeling of, like, man, we're getting more Dragon Ball. The 40th anniversary showcase was recently dropped. I'm a little late to the party here, but, like, it dropped recently, and some big announcements were made about the future of Dragon Ball. And it is a little weird when you stop and think about it. I'm not saying that I thought, oh, Toriyama's passed away, Dragon Ball is dead. I didn't think that for a second, don't get me wrong. Like I said, as I just, said, there's no way that was going to happen. Obviously, it's too big. It's a franchise that will outlive its creator. It was always going to, even if Toriyama didn't pass for another 20, 30 years. Dragon Ball would have continued because it's so big. It's that iconic. It's that much a part of popular culture now, and I am certainly not. I don't have a problem with it continuing necessarily, but it does have a strange feeling. If, like me, you're a millennial, you grew up with this series for a long, long time. I mean, it started before I was born. Dragon Ball started in '86, but, like, so many people grew up with this series. You know, most of us here in the U.S., we started watching it on Toonami back in the late '90s and early 2000s, and it is kind of a strange feeling, right? No more Toriyama. They can't consult him anymore. He can't be an advisor on any of these things. He can't do his original sketches anymore. He can't. A lot of times for, like, new Dragon Ball story arcs, or when Dragon Ball Super started, or even like a new Dragon Quest game, he usually would, like, sketch the main characters. That was usually his, like, tradition. Every time he contributed, he would draw new monsters and everything because that was his art style in the Dragon Quest games. And that series is still going, and a lot of people may not even know that Dragon Ball GT, which he had very little involvement with and is not even considered canon anymore. Love it or hate it, GT exists, but, like, Toriyama did draw the main characters for that show. He drew Pan, he drew, that version of Trunks, like, he did sketch those characters and basically said, he basically just gave Toei, his blessing and just said, "Yeah, do what you wanna do." But, like, he still, like, uh, sort of offered that, that was his way of just saying, "Yeah, I'll sketch these characters for you," just to kind of, uh, you know, christen the series a little bit or how whatever you wanna call it. And I was like, "Okay." Like, he's a big deal, man. Like, it's rare that we get something new that's Dragon Ball related or otherwise that, like, doesn't have Toriyama's, touch somewhere, you know what I mean? So, like, on the one hand, these announcements are cool, and I am kind of excited for them, but on the other hand, it is a little weird. It is a little weird that Toriyama is, like, you know, is not gonna be directly involved in any way anymore. Now, we don't know to what extent he was involved with Super, uh, as far as, like, the manga or the anime. Like, we don't know how much he was involved, obviously, and I'm sorry for the life of me, I don't, off the top of my head, know the name of the manga artist that currently draws the Dragon Ball manga. Toriyama's successor, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. But that guy, who's pretty good, he's a pretty good artist. Nobody can really replace Toriyama, but, like, he's done a pretty good job, I'm told. I've seen some of his manga artwork. I mean, I've never read the Dragon Ball Super manga, but, like, he's pretty cool. He's pretty talented. Seems like a talented dude. But the Super anime, of course, was very flawed, and that brings me to the like first major announcement of this 40th anniversary showcase. Right after we got this amazing animation reel of like iconic epic moments from the entire history of the Dragon Ball manga, which was actually really cool to see. Um, yeah, that was awesome. I'll put a link in the description or something so you can see that video if you haven't seen it. Um, but yeah, Dragon Ball Super has always been a majorly flawed series. I never really saw it as a worthy successor to Dragon Ball Z. Um, I always thought it was a little weird how they sandwiched it right before the canon ending of DBZ, but right after the Majin Buu arc. I always thought that was a little strange. Before we even got to the quality of the show itself, which for the first several arcs was just not good, and like the early episodes, especially the first couple of arcs, were just the animation was just terrible, worse than Dragon Ball has ever looked. Um, it's pretty well known at this point that like Super had some serious animation problems until we get to, I want to say, the final arc, until they got like to that space tournament, the universe survival arc. That was that was like the only time where I almost loved Super, or I was at least on board. I was kind of hooked at that point. A lot of the series kind of I was on and off about. I would peek in on it every now and then and be like, this is not Dragon Ball. This is some mockery shit. And I would come back to it and I'd leave it and I'd come back to it. I remember seeing some of the Zamasu arc, which at least had a very interesting villain. Zamasu's an interesting villain. Uh, I hate that they like redid the whole Future Trunks thing again, kind of blatantly. Eh, it was a mixed bag, like everything in Super. It was just a mixed bag. Some of the transformations, Super Saiyan Blue, what the fuck was that? Like, I still hate whenever I see that. I'm sorry. I know it probably has its defenders, but the Super Saiyan Blue is so lazy to me. I always hated it. And, you know, I'm probably not alone on this, but Dragon Ball GT, for all the massive flaws that show had, Super Saiyan 4 is still probably the coolest Super Saiyan transformation ever, and I stand by that. Um, and it's cool that they brought it back for Daima, um, even though Daima had its own problems. But still, I really like the last arc of Super. It's pretty good. Yeah, it's still it still has moments that feel like fan fiction. A lot of Super just feels like fan fiction, and that's another problem. The writing, the storytelling, a lot of it's just repeating a lot of the same beats as past Dragon Ball stuff. So when you get to that final arc, the space tournament, I was like, okay, this is where the series had me hooked. I liked Ultra Instinct. Maybe not as unique and striking as Super Saiyan 4, but it was a much cooler transformation with a lot more novelty to it than Super Saiyan Blue. You know, it was like, what the fuck is blue? But Ultra Instinct was cool. The tournament itself was an interesting idea because tournaments were always a big part of Dragon Ball's history. So like to bring that into the cosmos and you have all these power dynamics with the the gods of destruction all watching and the angels and Zeno, the god of everything that has like the mentality of a child is really cool. It all feels like Dragon Ball. That stuff to me, all those ideas, just the general vibe of that final arc of Super actually felt like a very Toriyama story arc. It felt like something he would do. And who knows, maybe Toriyama stepped in there. I don't know. But but yeah, it just felt like him. I even liked that at one point by the end of that, spoilers, I guess, Goku and Frieza and Android 17 are all fighting alongside each other. They form like this awesome trio to take out the final dude. Can't remember his name, sorry. He wasn't that memorable. The big alien dude, you know what I'm talking about. The big, serious, burly alien guy. He wasn't that memorable, but the overall arc itself is pretty memorable, and the dynamics of it are pretty memorable. And I like how there's lots of fun callbacks. Even Master Roshi, he gets to fight in this tournament somehow, and he whips out the fucking uh, evil containment wave thing from way back in the Piccolo Junior arc. I was like, this is actually pretty fucking cool. So like, it's all right. Super ended so well that I think it made up for a lot of the shit that came before, almost, kind of. But the problem is I wouldn't rewatch any of that, and we'll get to that because apparently they might be remaking Super, but but we're getting a new Dragon Ball Super continuation, starting with the Galactic Patrol arc, which that was a big announcement. People have been wanting that for a long time. People were really, really upset when Daima was announced and had nothing to do with the continuation of the Super manga. It was just its own little thing. Um, and look, I'll even admit at this point that even though I was very optimistic about Daima when it started and thought, it's made by Toriyama himself. Come on. He was totally involved this time. He hasn't been like 100% involved in Dragon Ball in so long. It's bound to be great. I have to be brutally honest. I love the man, may he rest in peace, but Daima had problems. Daima had some serious pacing issues and story issues, and there were some cool things about it. I loved the retconned origin of the Namekians. That was fucking cool. And I like the idea of, this demon world that we never got to see before. Like, it had cool ideas, but the execution and the pacing of that show, despite being so short, really wasn't very good. And I don't necessarily think that was all on Toriyama. I think just the overall style of production, kind of making it up as they went along week to week, was not a good idea. Um, and it shows, there's just. I still think Daima was neat, but I wouldn't say it was like vastly superior to Super either. Um, it was a lot quicker and easier to watch, and the animation was really good. Like, it was one of the better looking Dragon Ball animes we've seen. Um, and that brings me again to Galactic Patrol. Apparently, Moro is the main villain of this one. I've heard a little bit about him. Again, never read any of the Super manga, so I only heard bits and pieces about like the next couple of arcs that apparently they are going to animate now. And the first one is Moro. I know he's like this big goat dude who devours entire planets. And I'm like, well, that's one way to escalate a Dragon Ball villain, I guess. Right? We've never quite seen that before. He sounds kind of neat. I don't know. I'm kind of excited for this arc just because, like, the idea of Goku and Vegeta being like these galactic, uh, super space police warriors is kind of cool. I'm kind of into that. And I'm sure Jacko plays a role in there because he's like a galactic cop guy. So I'm like, that sounds kind of cool. Um, I'm excited to see more, you know, um, especially since I think production wise, and we've been seeing this a lot lately. I think Toei is finally taking Dragon Ball a lot more seriously lately when it comes to the animation quality, animation production. And we're seeing that a lot. Daima looked great, obviously. Uh, we didn't get to see any footage of the Galactic Patrol arc yet because it's probably not animated yet, but, like, I have a feeling it's gonna be very nice, especially if the last arc of Super was also much better in the animation department and was looking better than Super started. I just feel like the people that worked on that stuff probably have a lot more experience now, and if they combine that with some of the people that worked on Daima, maybe, possibly. Even some of the recent movies, like the Dragon Ball superhero movie, I thought looked really good. You know, some people were iffy on that CGI. I thought it looked pretty cool, actually. Um, I don't think the show itself is gonna be animated that way, but I'm just saying the quality of Dragon Ball animes lately have been better, and I think we're finally over that point that Super started at, where it looked like crap. And that brings me to another big announcement, that they're redoing Super. Apparently, starting with the Beerus arc, it's literally called Dragon Ball Super Beerus, which is weird. Um, it's they're redoing the Battle of Gods arc, so I guess it kinda makes sense. Beerus is the main, like, antagonist of that arc. They're doing that again, but the rumor is they're not stopping there. They're redoing all of Super, possibly. And what lends credence to that is that apparently this Beerus arc is going to be condensed to only 6 episodes, and it's coming this fall. So it's like, okay. And of course, why would they do that? To up the animation quality. And the footage they showed, because we did get footage of that, looks great. It looks better than ever. It's like, wow, this looks really clean and really good. Like, this looks so much better than the early episodes of Super. Like, it's light years ahead of it. Much higher quality, much better this time. And it's like, yeah, remaking Super, even though it's not crazy old, it's not that long ago that series ended. I mean, it's probably longer ago than it actually feels, because I think it ended in what, like 2018? But it is kinda crazy that they're willing to do that, and that's what I mean when I say, like, Toei's taking this seriously now, like, they wanna remake Super. It's like, "No, we fucked up the first time, we didn't do it well enough." Apparently, the original Super anime didn't even follow the manga that closely, so it's possible that they're trying to stick closer to the manga. They're trying to condense a lot of that filler, they're trying to make it look a lot better, and it's like, shit, if they can do that with the Zamasu arc, which I already thought was at least an interesting arc when it came to the villain. Like, Zamasu was an interesting villain. If you could condense that arc, clean that one up, even that could be made a lot better. And I don't know, will they go all the way to the space tournament arc, the survival tournament? Does that need to be remade? I mean, I guess it could be better pacing wise because it did drag a little, but either way, I'm actually surprisingly excited about this. Normally, I would say, well, you're remaking a whole series, what a waste of time and resources. But like, no, like even if this means it might be another year or two before we get to Galactic Patrol arc, I'm okay with this just because like Super needs it. Super needs a remake, bro. I'm actually glad they're willing to do that and condense it at the same time and make it much quicker and better paced. Good. Good. Dragon Ball deserves it, and honestly, after Toriyama's passing, the fact that Toei is taking the series so seriously afterwards, I actually have to give them props for that. They're taking the property seriously. They're not just gonna, you know, you would think they would get lazier or milk it more afterwards, but that does bring me to one other announcement, though, the third middle announcement between those 2 that I was far less interested in, because it's a video game. It's a Dragon Ball game. New Age what is it? Age 1000. Age 1000, which apparently we don't know much about it. It was just a teaser for like a brand new character made by Toriyama himself before he passed. This new silver-haired Saiyan guy who seems to be in the far-flung future. I think the title is a reference to the fact that it's set 1,000 years after the Dragon Ball timeline. So I'm like, okay, that kind of has my interest, but like, what kind of game is this? And then the gears were turning in my head, and I was like, oh God, there are people saying that Age 1000 might be a clue that this is an online game because apparently that was mentioned in an online Dragon Ball game that they used to have that I've never heard of, but um and then the gears were turning in my head and I was like, "Oh no, please don't tell me this is a gotcha game." It would be so easy and financially, like, huge, and gacha games are so fucking popular now, good lord. You know how easy it would be to make a Dragon Ball gacha game? There's so many characters in Dragon Ball, even non-canon ones that could easily be thrown in there, like, even if you left those out, there's so many characters in Dragon Ball. Oh my god. A Dragon Ball gacha game could totally exist, and I hope that's not what it is. But honestly, Dragon Ball video games in general, I tend not to care much about these days. After Fighters, which I thought was fantastic, most Dragon Ball games, which are usually just fighting games, which is part of the problem, uh, I don't care for them much these days because they all tend to be very similar, or they all tend to be very, like, shallow and not very good. Fighters was the exception. That felt like that was Arc System Works. That felt like, okay, the Guilty Gear guys making a Dragon Ball game, and it was great. That's still fun to play, but, like, outside of that, I've never really played a Dragon Ball game that held my attention, like, past, like, a couple months or a year of playing it. I don't come back to Budokai or anything all that often, even though I loved it as a teenager because I was just crazy about Dragon Ball. I loved the license, but the games themselves weren't that good. So it's like, on one hand, okay, the fact that this has such an interesting premise sounds cool, but I feel like, man, I could picture Toei, man, as respectful as these other projects feel towards Dragon Ball's future. Um, I just feel like this could be a gotcha game, right? Because if it's an online game, it would be very easy to just make it a gotcha game. And if it's not a gotcha game, well, I don't know if I care much about an online Dragon Ball game, period, but still, we won't learn about that one until April, when they're gonna discuss that one more, I guess, and reveal what it actually is. But those other two announcements, regardless of what Age 1000 ends up being, Galactic Patrol arc, awesome. I want that. Remake of Dragon Ball Super, at least the Beerus arc. We'll see how much more of it they're gonna do, but I'm on board. I'm on board. Like, there's even rumors that they might do Resurrection F as well, because that was part of the Super anime as well. And sure, go ahead. I'm one of those few people who didn't even mind the Resurrection F movie. I did not suffer through the anime version, the Super version, because I heard those episodes were brutally bad. But I didn't even mind the Resurrection F movie that much. I thought it was kind of fun. I don't know. I thought it was okay. I think all of the movies, all the recent movies entertained me on some level. Even if Broly and Superhero were much better than the first two. I still had fun with all of them, to be honest, but, um, yeah, I would say the future of Dragon Ball is looking pretty hype. I'm actually pretty excited for where it's going and how things are escalating with that, and it's good to know, if nothing else, that in a post-Toriyama world, old school Dragon Ball fans like me especially can still look forward to Dragon Ball stuff and not feel bad about it? It doesn't feel like Toei is just milking or cashing in at this point and saying, "Well, yeah, I'll just keep putting shit out." It's like, no, they're putting some work in, it feels like. You know? Again, they need this series to continue, so it's like it would be easy to take a cheaper route, but I'm glad that they're making decisions for these projects that actually seem like smart decisions that they didn't have to do, but they're willing to do them. So that's cool. That's cool. Looking forward to it. What do you guys think? Dragon Ball fans out there, you give me your thoughts on the hype future of Dragon Ball. What are you most excited for out of all this? Let me know. And then until next time, you get to burning and live for the passion.